guest speaker today, award-winning columnist from the Kansas City Star, Vahe Gregorian. Before we visit with Vahe, I'd like to remind you to keep yourself muted. And if you'd like to ask a question at the end of our session, hit the chat feature at the bottom of the Zoom. I'd like to thank our sponsors, Chicken and Pickle in North Kansas City, Sports Scene in Lee Summit, Conrad's in Liberty, Tiger Board out of Columbia, and Stables Grill in Kearney. Also, we'd like to ask you, if you're watching this on YouTube and you're not yet a member of the Tiger Club, please go to kctigerclub.com and sign up for a membership. As you can imagine, with everything going on this year, our membership is down some, and we really could use the support. We're unable to hold our annual golf tournament this last year, and we don't know about this year either. So if you can help us out at $50, we'll entitle you to listen to our Zoom calls live. And when we get back to normal business, there'll be other perks as well. So welcome, everybody. Vahe, it's good to have you back. The last time we talked was Tuesday, November 3rd. Not much happened in the world since then, but we will talk some sports today. There's a lot happening in the sports world. Unfortunately, not much with Mizzou as the basketball season has been put on pause. Hopefully get back to action this week. Tigers currently ranked 16th and 17th in the two polls. What is your assessment of the team so far under Cuonzo Martin?
Well, first of all, I just want to say Happy New Year to everybody. I hope everybody is in as good health physically, emotionally as possible. And I send all the good vibes I have to anybody who's dealing with ramifications of the COVID and looking forward to getting the other side of this. I also want to say, if you ask a question I don't want to answer, I'm going to take my cue from something I saw in the Zitz comic strip the other day, where the character Jeremy pretends that his screen just froze during a school question. So I'll see how long I can hold it if I have to. Hopefully I didn't just jinx the whole operation. Anyway, to your actual question, Mark, I've seen enough of this team to feel like I know I like it. And I was a little confused by what happened with Tennessee. I don't think that team should have been 20 points better I'm going to call it on the home floor of Missouri, even though it's a little different than usual circumstances. But I like the parts. I like the way they play together. I think it's tempting for some people, I think, to look at some of those wins as less convincing or less meaningful because of what happened with Tennessee and at Mississippi State, for that matter. But I think those wins were important and real, and I think testimony to what their potential is. I was thinking about this in the context of the Chiefs, but I think that this is quite true with Missouri. I do think we're in a year where circumstances make it that maybe it's never been more value to continuity and experience and knowing each other a bit. And we can explore that more in the context of the Chiefs here as we go forward too. But that's just my thought. There's so many twists to it right now, of course, and you wonder even what the NCAA tournament's going to look like, being played all in Indianapolis, for instance. I had a friend who's a bit of a jokester. Some of you might know him. His name's Dave Holzman. He used to work at the Columbia Daily Tribune, and he's one of the funniest guys I know. He sent me an email suggesting we needed to get the NCAA tournament set up between Lawrence and Columbia, with Municipal Auditorium as the jewel of it all, and get back what we deserve from Indianapolis. But I don't think that's quite going to work out.
The Tigers, if they play this Saturday, they're scheduled against Texas A&M, and as far as we know, that game will happen. They will have been off 11 days. Our cohort, Jarrett Sutton, who's a member of the Tiger Club board, and of course an NBA scout, former Mizzou letterman, made the comment the other day that basketball conditioning is, when you don't play for a long time, you lose some of that. And the Tigers were in the COVID protocol, could not have team activities. They may not look real sharp coming out of the block on Saturday.
Yeah, that's look, Jared would know that with a lot more experience and precision than I would, but you can only surmise just logically that if you're not able to even simulate what you're trying to do in the ways that you would normally do it, then there's going to be a lag. And what I don't know, and I should know, but what I don't know is to what degree they're simulating the simulation of what they can do. You know, how guys can do stuff on their own. But basketball conditioning is its own thing, just like, you know, football conditioning is and soccer conditioning is. It's often only duplicable, if that's a word, in the process of doing it.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting how they look on Saturday. Again, assuming they can play. Vahe, do you think at this point we are going to see the conference tournaments, or will the conferences need to use that weekend to make up games that have been canceled?
I think we have to assume everything's a little fluid or in flux, and think about what is going to be. At least I'm thinking about it this way, and the powers that be may look at it differently, but I think I'd want to emphasize what creates the truest of champions. And in a certain way, the conference tournaments always have been the last chance saloon, and not necessarily the most. You have a panel discussion just on this, right? What's the fairest way to determine who represents your conference? And it obviously changes the higher up the scale you go to so-called Power Five conferences. But I think that's what guardians of the game have to be thinking about, is like, what's our best way in this situation to sort of divine the best teams in our league? And I'm not sure I know the answer to, even what the right answer is to that, but I think it's more scrambled than ever to try to figure it out. I do think too, Mark, to your broader point, I mean, one way or another, there has to be an accounting for postponements and moving around a schedule. So that's what's going to be really telling as we go forward. And we've certainly seen that this can change instantly and for an extended period of time.
It's interesting. You look at the SEC standings. South Carolina's played one game. Missouri's played three. I think the most that anybody's played is four. And interesting on the standings, Alabama's come out of nowhere to be 4-0. Kentucky looks like they picked themselves off the mat and they're undefeated. It's going to be a very interesting race, although I still think Tennessee's the best team in the conference.
Tennessee looked like the sort of team that you figure is a Final Four type team, at least in the one game I really watched Tennessee, which was against Missouri. I just thought, that kind of energy, that kind of diverse attack, just skill set, playing together. It just looked like a great team. And I know it's not a perfect team, but I think that's what I would look at as a Final Four caliber team.
Of course, they lost to Alabama, so that all of a sudden, a team that lost to Western Kentucky is 4-0. Let's talk a little football. When we talked to you in November, basically we agreed that Missouri finished the season 5-5. It was a success. It was disappointing how it ended. It was disappointing we couldn't play the bowl game, although that's probably not too bad of a thing with the attrition that had happened on the team due to illness. But I think 5-5 was great, and Eli Drinkwitz followed it up with a great recruiting season.
Yeah, it is too bad, that sort of anticlimactic ending. But I think in this year, in this cycle of everything, I think we've all learned to live with that kind of thing. And I wouldn't exactly call it what the kids call a first world problem, but I do think that there could have been a lot worse things for Missouri football to deal with. And so it's a shame. It's too bad. But I think we did get to see the foundation of what's here. And it looks to me like the foundation is such that I probably used this term before, and I don't know why I love it so much, but a bridge to the future. I do feel like they have set some things in there that tell you about a tempo, tell you about a style. The recruiting is high energy. I do think the ability to win a couple different ways during the season showed you something. I think he has the pulse of the team. I like how they're able to adapt to different situations. Um, and again, it's not a perfect scenario. I I think we were looking at this the other day, and I mean this in a humorous way, but also in a little bit of a contextual way. I think they're far above the basement and not quite at the SEC ceiling. Um, and I think one way we can illustrate that is with Alabama. Um, I think the number is correct. Somebody can let me know if I've got this wrong, but that 38 points they gave up to Alabama was the second lowest points Alabama scored this season. I don't know if that's exactly a rallying cry, but I think it just sort of speaks to that distance between the very top teams in the SEC and Missouri. I but I obviously I don't think you'd say Missouri's in the bottom third, and I don't think you'd quite say they're in the top 2, 3, 4. But I think they're in a spot where if they continue to build, they will climb into a different tier of contention.
It's interesting, the not two early top 25s came out today, and I think I looked at two of them. One had three SEC teams in the top five, and one had three in the top six. So we wrapped up college football season last night. Amazing, we got through it. That performance last night by Alabama was maybe the greatest offense since LSU last year, we could say, but they had three of the top five vote getters in the Heisman Trophy, and that's after they lost Jalen Waddle for the season mid-year. I mean, what a performance. I know Ohio State was down some guys and they lost their running back on the second play of the game, but that was pretty impressive. Wouldn't you agree?
It was, and I didn't get to watch much of the game. I kind of monitored it. We've got a couple special sections coming this week for the Chiefs, and the nature of the deadline situation was such that it required trying to keep your eye on that instead of the game. But I glanced over at the score a couple times, and I have to admit I've come to a point where I would have been surprised if Alabama hadn't been up 3 touchdowns or more, and I felt like at that point I hadn't exactly missed anything in a way. Um, and that's a little bit of a funny point. I mean, I tip of the cap to them. I admire what they've been able to do, but boy, it takes the intrigue out of a game to see that kind of dominance.
It was very impressive. And Devontae Smith didn't play much second half. He hurt his finger, and after a record-setting first half. All right, nice segue. Let's talk about the Chiefs. That's the topic at hand. Surprising, I guess the Browns handled the Steelers, although that second play of the game with the bad snap that went for a touchdown, and then Roethlisberger, correct me if I'm wrong, I think he had 4 interceptions.
He did.
Browns, very impressive performance. The Browns seem to have a big chip on their shoulder, and I know a couple of Pittsburgh players dissed them a little bit before the game, and so I feel like the Chiefs are decided favorites, but I think Cleveland does come in with a lot of momentum.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. And you know, I don't have the numbers exactly right, but think about how a Chiefs fan felt during the 2 decades plus without a playoff victory, and picture that moment. I guess the moment would have been that win over Houston in whatever it was, 2016.
15 seasons.
15 season.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it's fair to say that the Browns are at that stage, but it's a little bit of a thing, right? It's been 25 years or so, and they've got some pretty dynamic personalities there. Baker Mayfield kind of stands for that a little bit. And so they play with a kind of zeal and emotion. And, you know, there's some things connecting the Browns and the Chiefs, obviously everything from Kareem Hunt to John Dorsey being the architect of a lot of the personnel, even Marty Schottenheimer in the past, you know, things like that are kind of interesting things. I do think of the Chiefs as the decided favorite, but I think there's a combustible variable here with the Browns that it's hard to account for. I think, though, the thing that is worth considering is a couple of these stats for you. The Chiefs, but under Patrick Mahomes, so Patrick Mahomes is the main starter, are 4-1 in the postseason the last 2 years. They were 4-16 in the 48 years between the last Super Bowl victory and that. So that ought to at least remind you that the tone of this has changed, right? It's still easy to for a fan to fall back into feeling like that perpetual trap door is just waiting. And the Chiefs could lose, but it doesn't have to be indicative of that. It just could be, well, they lost, and that's how it goes. Um, I think also though that some things we've seen some markers with the Chiefs that I think are important. You look at the 2020 calendar year; it's the best year hands down in Chiefs history, right? The other times they won conference championships or league championships in the AFL days, they didn't even get back to the playoffs the next year. So in this case, they had a franchise record for victories and might have had more if they didn't play the JV in the last game. So we can fixate on that, or you can fixate on the fact that they barely won 7 games in a row, eight I think overall, by one score or fewer. I tend to think that that is a sign of strength. I don't think that we'll really know what it means though till we see how it plays out in the playoffs, right? I think we'll see that that interpretation of strength is going to be exactly what's the crux of how they proceed from here. A close game though. I like the idea of a team that's done it all season, has a veteran core back from a Super Bowl team against a team that hasn't been here before. And so I think advantage Chiefs. One thing to think about too with this, the way this game matches up, Brown scored 28 points in the first quarter. No team in NFL playoff history had done that. And yet Browns did give up 501 yards passing, and a couple of those touchdowns were obviously set up by the turnovers. So I don't know that we have to think the Browns are the most explosive team in football. They'll pose great challenges, especially running game in a lot of ways, and especially in the intermediate pass game if they can keep the Chiefs off balance with the run. But I do believe the Chiefs will score plenty of points against the Browns.
Do you have any updates on the Chiefs' injury situation? Clyde Edwards-Helaire, Anthony Hitchens, I think tweeted that he was coming back. Do you know anything more?
Yeah, nothing really beyond that. Andy Reid had a news conference with us yesterday. He was, I think, somewhere between cryptic or still waiting to get information with players coming back in. We really expect a lot more of an update tomorrow on Wednesday as we get Andy again and some of the players.
Is it safe to assume Mitchell Schwartz is out for the year?
I think it's become understood that that's the case. What I don't know at this point is whether there's a last second change in how this is. I do wonder how much physically better he would have to be to really have a shot. I don't know the answer that I'd assume he's out, but my hunch sure is that we're not expecting him back.
You've been doing this job for a long time. What is your thought on rust versus rest, where the Chiefs starters will have had 3 weeks off by the time they play this Sunday? And, last year they had a week off and they came out in the first quarter against Houston and were just putrid and, made a lot of silly mistakes. But what you've seen this team, you've been around them. What do you think?
I think it's going to be one of those cases where it's absolutely about the hindsight, because we're going to feel like that was a difference one way or another here. If they lose, I think we'll all think, well, it was the rust. If they win, I think we'll shrug it off and go forward. I may have told this story to this very group before, but it's always in my mind on this. And this is why I think of it as something that has to be completed to be understood. That Royals game 4 in 2015, when they're down, I think was it 6-1 in the 7th inning, whatever it was. They're down
6-2.
6-2. And we at that point, in our operation of the whole process, had 6-7 writers down in Houston, and so we're making decisions or evaluating decisions all along about who's going to write what, because we've got a lot of people writing a lot of things really fast after the game. So our mid-game budget for all this, I can still find it, has tentative ideas that Mellinger is going to write about how the whole season wasn't worth a damn because of how the playoffs ended. My assignment was going to be how everything went. All the September moves to rest players backfired. So we started, cobbling together a few sentences, and then you'd see single, 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 and suddenly we're all just looking at each other like, I think this is going to be different. And so look, the wild card game and any number of the other postseason games remind you of that. But in this case, I'm bringing this up because of the very specific point about how we view rest. I think we'll view it in terms of how it works out most of all. One thing to remember though with rest, Andy Reid's first Super Bowl team in Philadelphia, in game 15 that season, got blasted by the Rams. And so they lost. They had a bad taste in their mouth. They lost. They'd been 13-1, I think, coming into that game. Now they're 13-2. But they've got the bye going into they know they've got the number 1 seed sewn up going into their last regular season game. So they've got a loss. Then they decide they're going to sit their starters anyway, and then they're going to have an off week. They get killed by Cincinnati 38-20, I think, in the last regular season game. So now they're going in with 2 straight losses. They've sat the starters. They've got a week off, gloom and doom, and that's the team that gets to the Super Bowl. That Eagles team has nothing to do with this team except for this. I think over time we've seen that Andy Reid's a pretty good coach. I think we understand that he part of his grasp of everything in his reach is understanding what his team has, what it's about, the feel of his team as he works with it. And Andy Reid thought it was best to rest these guys. I have to think that's the best informed decision you could have. I think you also have to think first, do no harm. If anybody, we saw some injuries as it was, but if anybody thinks that it was better to expose Patrick Mahomes to injury in a meaningless game, I can't embrace that argument. I get that his last game wasn't the sharpest. I get that there's a case to be made for wanting to feel like you're on a roll. But I think that arrested Patrick Mahomes, he's not going to forget the plays. His intuition is going to hang in there. These guys have been together a few years now. I don't see why they'd have a problem other than just getting with it right away from the start.
And I would agree. And obviously, this is not Andy Reid's first rodeo, and I think he knows what he's doing. But it'll be interesting to see. We're talking with Vahe Gregorian for Kansas City Star. If you have a question for Vahe, please use the chat feature at the bottom. Vahe, we do have some questions shaping up here, so if you're ready to go, we'll start firing away at you. So,
sure.
Do you think Eric Bieniemy is really being selective as next destination, or is he not getting a fair shot with all these openings?
Really hard to tell. Let's remember a little of the context of this. Eric came into this postseason having had seven interviews as head coach over the previous 2 years as offensive coordinator of the Chiefs. My understanding is it was, and I may have missed something in the last 24 to 48 hours, but that he's been interviewed by every team, 5 teams other than Houston, where apparently Deshaun Watson wanted him to be interviewed. And I guess the Eagles fired Doug Peterson, huh?
Yes.
Yeah. So there's another opening there, and that Eric played in Philadelphia for Andy, and Andy obviously has the connection there. But maybe the Eagles don't want another Andy Reid guy. There's a lot of things.
Yeah, they only won a Super Bowl at the last one, so
I know. I got my Philly fanatic doll back here behind me. That's part of my lineage from my days back there. But I know how the Eagle fan is wired. So the question really is going to end up being, what does it say about the NFL and the state of its commitment to minority coaches if Eric Bieniemy emerges from this postseason 0 for 12 finally, or maybe 0 for 13 in job opportunities? And That's a much broader, more nuanced and complicated topic than maybe we want to make it. But I do think I talked to Willie Lanier about some of this for a story last week. And here's the thing. Every team has its right to its own decision. Of course, you have to figure out what fits for you. You have to understand what the implications are of how somebody, what they emphasize, who they are, all these things. I remember Missouri grad Gary Barnett telling me in the past that it was always, the most important thing was always about fit. And I sometimes wonder if Gary might have been better off staying at Northwestern, but that's a whole nother thing. But there's something different about each individual decision versus what the collective picture looks like. It isn't there. I mean, when you think, okay, well, everybody could make this decision this way, but why is it that a black head coach who's been a offensive coordinator for a Super Bowl champion and a team that is on the verge of potentially another one and has all the recommendations, all the stuff on the resume you'd want, why is it that he can't get a head coaching job? And I just think it leaves the question hovering about what's going on there.
Follow up on
way,
that.
let me just say one last thing, Mark, too. I haven't used the word racism, and I'm reluctant to use that word because I don't know what it is. But Willie Lanier would say, he told me the story about what he would advise when a company that had 1,400 brokers and only 14 were black, and how do you get more blacks into the company? He said, hire them. And his point was, you hire at the same failure rate. Other people don't work out. Why wouldn't you give a chance to somebody whose resume might be twice as impressive as others, even if you have misgivings for some other reason?
As a follow-up, are teams reluctant to hire a coach who may not be available till after the Super Bowl to come on board? Does that affect decisions?
I don't know that answer. I don't know it with enough information to say, but I think I can feel comfortable saying there have been many coaches hired from this situation because you want to hire coaches that are whose teams are going this deep into a season.
Okay. Next question is about Mizzou's defensive coordinator. What direction you think Coach Drinkwitz will go? Someone he has worked with, an experienced Power 5 coach, a mid-major defensive coordinator, or another direction?
Well, I'm looking forward to Barry Odom's return to Columbia as defensive coordinator. Now, I don't think that'll happen. I don't know the answer to that, but I think I look forward to seeing the answer to that because I think it'll give us a little different feel for what he's looking for than when you're just assembling your staff in the first place. And I might be wrong about this, but I assume this is the first assistant he's had to replace. Unless something early shook out that I can't remember. But so I think I can't claim enough specific knowledge about how he do it to really have an opinion on it or an insight. But I think it'll be from this that we start getting a feel for what he's looking for and what he's going to do.
Who do you see within the SEC that would be capable of displacing Alabama in the national championship race? I'll even take it further in the country. I guess Clemson is the number one team in the not too early top 25, but within the SEC, is anybody ready to challenge Alabama?
Anytime I think about that, I'm always thinking in terms of a 2 or 3 year period, like, well, this school has the resources and they should be able to get there. And once in a while, Alabama has a little crack in the armor when, 3 Heisman Trophy candidates move on. I don't know that all 3 are even going to move on, are they? I don't know if that's been.
Smith's a senior. Jones, I think, is leaving, and I'm not sure about Harris.
So isn't that something when, like, if just for example, if Missouri had 3 of the top 5 Heisman candidates or 3 of the top 4, and they were all gone, I think we'd say, well, that's kind of it for Missouri for 10 years or, 5, 6, 7 years, just because the density of what an Alabama is able to recruit. And we know all the markers for why that's been that way, right? It's just, it perpetuates itself. So I when I think of that question, I think of the schools that have the resources, and I would assume Georgia, Tennessee, perhaps LSU. This is without looking at numbers recently, but the schools with that kind of investment, that kind of history, Florida would be the best equipped. But I think the proof's in the pudding. Let's see how what it looks like in 3 years, because I just don't see a anything but temporary displacements of Alabama coming in the world as we know it now.
Well, it's interesting. Tua got hurt last year. Mac Jones comes off the bench and he ends up third in the Heisman Trophy race this year. And then I think their backup this year, quarterback, was the number one high school quarterback in the country the year before. So, and yes, now I look up, not while you were talking, Najee Harris, it looks like he will enter the draft. So I think they'll be pretty good, though. Question about the Royals. Dayton Moore says the Royals are in a better position to win today than the previous couple of seasons. Do you agree?
I do. And let me qualify that by saying, much like Dayton Moore, I'm a glass half full guy, or as Mike Matheny would put it, I'm a glass 3/4 full guy. I tend to think hope springs eternal on the sorts of things they've been doing. I think anybody that watched them last year thought it would be excited about the young pitching. I think the lineup has a chance to be, really semi-loaded. Certainly thick with power through the middle. You still got this terrific hitter in Witt. You've got guys that have gone from maybe they're major leaguers to pretty established, like Hunter Dozier. The new bats they've brought in. So all those things, but I will retreat to one central variable, Mondesi. And, I think he's the difference between a team that is kind of always nibbling and, maybe can get above 500, and a team that is over 500 and maybe even in contention. Now, there's many other variables, of course. Pitching's always going to be at the root of it. They got had a pretty productive bullpen year. They've got pieces there, but we don't know that that'll come back. We don't know how Singer and Bubic will necessarily look on their next time through. We have kind of limited sample set with them, but we do know they look like the real thing. That even as others respond to them, that they're growing, and we also know that they've got 3, 4, 5 guys that are going to be, right on the cusp of being major league pitchers here in the next year, probably, depending on what their emphasis becomes. I like the leadership of Mike Matheny. I think he's got their attention. I think his approach is good. I think it was a good shakeup from Ned. I like Ned, and yet I also think that they took a little leap into the present with how Mike's doing things. And I think Mike benefited from his time off after being fired by the Cardinals. So I like the way it all shapes up.
I really like the Santana signing. If for no other reason, we don't have to face him. But the other thing, I think the White Sox are really looking strong, and they signed Liam Hendricks yesterday in their bullpen. So
it's funny when you mentioned that about Santana. I think this was maybe, you might have to correct me on my dates, Mark. It was maybe 2013 or 2014. He was with the Indians by then, I think.
Well, he went to Phillies briefly in between, but I think he was with the Indians then. Yeah.
It was some point when he was with the Indians, and he probably he was either one of 4 guys who hit homers against the Royals that day, or he had a couple himself. And I was sitting with Blair Kerkhoff in the press box. And I think Blair just turned to me and goes, "The Royals never have guys like this. Why don't the Royals ever have guys like this?" And I can honestly tell you that I'm glad you brought him up specifically. Over the years, I think I remember just anytime they were playing against him thinking like, that's just a guy that is going to keep punishing them. And you're right. If nothing else, you're not doing it to them now.
Next question. NFL Today stated the Chiefs appear to be bored in their last games and just played to the level of the competition. Is that an accurate assessment? Do you think they will elevate their play in the playoffs?
It's a great question, and I think there were moments where you sort of started doing the visuals with like cats bapping around little toys, and suddenly yawning and looking the other way. Like you wondered how intense they were. I I and I don't think I would call that though disrespect for opponents. I think it's just we need to remember that the motivation levels. I realize they only play once a week, and it's really in some ways not that long a season. But I think that it's hard to remember the punishment the body takes, the intensity of the motivation to play every week, finding causes to play for. There's a reason even pro athletes try to create, sometimes concoct grudges or disrespect things just because they got to get the juice going. I get that they're paid, and I get that it's once a week, but it's still human nature to have to find motivation. And I think that it's a little bit of a point of concern if you want to think about it, that they did seem to play down to their competition at times. But I think the flip side is look how they played against those better teams. Remember, they were 4-0 against teams that made the playoffs. I think all those were on the road. Is that right?
They were all on the road. Yeah.
All on the road. Bursts against those teams of just total dominance, I think, in each case. And Patrick said this the other day, and he kind of grinned when he said it, but he sort of acknowledged that they seem to do better, play better against the more impressive foes. And he paused to say, which I don't know if that's a good or a bad thing, but when it comes to the playoffs, I think you can say that's probably an asset. And if it was a problem during the regular season, it was one they still managed to win 14 out of 15 times they were trying. That seems like not that big a problem.
Next question from Paul, maybe the longest question we ever have had. So I'm going to try to condense it. Sorry, Paul. So Kansas City has at least been mentioned in connection to the NBA and NHL. It's been a long time since the Scouts and the Kings left. With the recent success of the Royals and the Chiefs as national darlings, has the image of the city and great fan support boosted our chances to land an expansion team in either sport?
Well, and Jarrett, I see Jarrett's face magically lighting up there. He may be better equipped in some ways to answer this than I am. And in fact, I'm sure he's better equipped to answer it than I am. But just from what I can observe out here in the peanut gallery, all those very things you asked about, Paul, I think have to be understood as a kind of groundswell of energy that supports the argument, right? I think it's understood Kansas City is a great sports town. It's understood Kansas City could add a franchise like Sporting KC and support it enormously in ordinary times. There have been championships, there's the facilities. So you've got all these things going on. I think you could say the infrastructure to some degree is exactly what you'd want. And this is where I don't know how to answer this part of the equation. I do think certainly in the case of hockey, you have to be thinking about whose pockets, who's the ownership group, how's that going to work? On one hand, Lamar Hunt Jr. is absolutely driven to try to get hockey here. I think that's the reason for his investment in so many different ways in hockey. On the other hand, he wasn't sure it was ready a year or two ago. He wants to keep cultivating more interest, more rinks, all that. And I think he also balked at the expansion price. So then you're left talking about moving a team here. And from a hockey standpoint, as exciting as we think it could be, I do wonder how much the NHL is thinking about a second franchise in the state of Missouri versus more in Canada. Um, I'm not saying that precludes it. I don't know. And Jarrett certainly is more plugged into anything that NBA people are saying behind the scenes. But it is kind of funny, Paul, you alluded to this, to think about mid 70s for that 2-year period where there were 4 major pro sports franchises here. And the lessons of that, I think maybe something for us all to think about, and maybe it's a good little Kansas City Star sports project at some point. You know, I don't know that Kansas City lacked the population or the interest to follow those teams. I think that the ineptitude of the scouts was a big problem. I don't exactly remember the initial success of the Kings, but I've never quite understood the Omaha, Kansas City aspect of that, and how much that might have diluted some of the equation instead of energizing a region. But all
Well,
that is good preamble. Go ahead, Mark. Sorry.
no, I say I'm old enough to remember that, and the Kansas City Omaha was the first couple seasons here, and then they were here full time, but they did not have a strong ownership group. And when you look back, the teams that succeeded, the Chiefs had Lamar Hunt, and the Royals had Ewing Kaufman, and the ownership groups of the scouts was really weak, and the Kings wasn't very strong either. I think I saw that one of the NBA franchises just sold for $2 billion, which tells me that if you're going to get an expansion, it's the premium on that is going to be in the billions on that. So we got a few more questions. You have time to stay with us for a little bit?
Yeah, sure.
You had a nice article on Mahomes versus Rodgers for MVP. Is your conclusion that Rodgers has the lead?
Yeah. As much as I'd like to take credit for Sam McDowell's excellent work, Sam wrote it, and I think Sam came to the conclusion in his article, and I agree with him that, you know, it's an imperfect thing, but if you just look at the numbers and look at the meaning of some of the numbers, I think, what do you attorneys on this call say? The preponderance of evidence would be that Rodgers is, I think, the right vote. Now, I think you can break this down a lot of different ways, and we can point to how numbers change based on complementary football, right? How running 4-minute drills at the end of games, you know, 3 or 4 times, maybe changes some of the dynamics. But in the end, it's over the overall schematic. I see the Rodgers argument. And by the way, not to leave out any accountants on the call, you know, I want to throw this in there too. I'm told if you crunch the numbers, if you torture the numbers long enough, you can get them to confess to anything. I think that's the term. So you can break it down any way you want, but in the end, I think Rodgers has the advantage.
Well, he made first team on the All-Pro team, so I think that gives you an indication. There's a question from Jim Wynn, and this is a great question, and I've always thought this. Why do the 2 conference semifinal games occur on different days? The Chiefs are on the number 1 seed, and they'll have 1 day less rest before the championship game. It seems to me you should play both NFC games 1 day and both AFC games the other. What are your thoughts?
I totally agree. I don't get the rationale. I assume there is a reason. I don't know if it's a good reason. But it's been, gosh, as long as I can remember, it's been that way.
It has, yes.
I don't know. Maybe we'll get to ask Commissioner Goodell about that during the pre-Super Bowl press conference on Zoom.
Yeah, I mean, at the least, I think maybe you give the number 1 seed the extra day of rest. But I guess everybody gets off Monday and Tuesday anyway, according to their schedule. So, but that's always puzzled me. That's a great question.
It is, and it does seem like with the opportunity to make things as, you know, equal as possible or as advantageous as possible to the teams that earned it the most, you would do that.
2 more questions. Does Eric Bieniemy get a job, and if so, where?
I have to say, I feel like if we don't know by now that he has a job, and you can hear what my dogs think about this.
He sounds like a big Bieniemy fan, I think.
Yeah, it's like, what is going on? You're right. I have to say, I feel like and again, pardon me, because I've been sort of just in the bunker on the special section stuff the last day or so. I haven't studied as up to date as I might like to have before we talk, but I'm not picking up a lot of chatter or energy about Eric getting a job right now, and I feel like we'd have some sense of that by now. So I grit my teeth and say I shudder to think not.
Last question, and there's a good one. How do you think having the same 4 to 6 teams being the only ones competing for the college football playoff every year affect interest in the playoff?
Well, I'll speak from personal standpoint first. It bores me. To be honest, it does. I don't. There's something about it's the same set of characters. And I mean, no insult to the people putting blood, sweat, and tears into all this, right? And it wouldn't bore me if it was a team of local interest, right? So
Yeah.
I think that's part of it. But I do think it makes me feel less invested in it. I mean, ordinarily, I mean, I would have found a way ordinarily if I hadn't gotten worn down by time. Like even if I'm working on something else, I'd make sure that TV was on and let myself get distracted by it too many times. But I didn't feel like that last night, and I feel like I'm betraying our friend Bill Hancock by saying this, but I just feel like it, it's just gotten that way, and I don't know what the answer is, right? I mean, I think we can say we all want to have the best way to select the truest of champion. And I feel pretty good about the system, but it's gotten pretty top heavy with usual suspects.
Yeah, and back in the 70s, I remember when they had the huge scholarship limits, you'd see teams dominating. You'd think there'd be a little more parity, but I didn't watch past the third quarter last night. I mean, I'm old and have to go get my sleep, but it was a so one-sided. But I kind of agree. I'd like to see some new faces in that championship. Vahe, thank you. You're always great. We really appreciate the time. We look forward to reading your stuff on the Chiefs in the coming weeks and hope it lasts for another month and get to the Super Bowl again. I wanted to compliment you. I thought the story you wrote on New Year's about how the Chiefs were sort of the shining light that bonded us together during the challenges of 2020. I thought that was a really good story, and we could really relate to that because that is something in my week, certainly, that I look forward to is watching the Chiefs every week.
Well, thanks a lot, Mark. And thanks as always. You guys are absolutely one of my favorite groups to ever talk to. I love the hospitality and the questions. I like this format too, where Mark's asking me interesting questions instead of me just riffing.
Well, I'm paid very well for this position. I have time in my hand now. I don't have a job. So, hey, thanks a lot again, Vahe. Hey, folks, next week, Dave Matter, who was recently named the Missouri Sports Writer of the Year from the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, and he's covered. Vahe, you've won that before, haven't you? If I remember.
I have, and it's really cool and incredibly well deserved by Dave. And Dave's won it a number of times, and he's just wonderful at his job and a great guy too. And
Yeah,
you guys know him.
Really knows Mizzou, so we look forward to having him. He'll be our guest next week. 2 weeks we have Jon Sundvold, and everybody knows Jon, and we really look forward to talking to him. So once again, our thanks to Vahe Gregorian. Thanks to Darren Weidick for coordinating the Zoom call, for Paul Blackman and Barry Cantor for lining up our speakers. Folks, again, check us out. Sign up for membership. We really need them. kctigerclub.com, and we always appreciate your feedback. You can go to info@kctigerclub.com. Have a great week, everybody, and hopefully we'll be talking to you after Chiefs win next week.